Nice to meet you.
Wonderful to meet you. What a breath of fresh air this book about Charlie's been. I
Thanks.
mean, and I'm just going to give you a quick backstory.
Sure.
I was at Barnes and Noble probably 4 or 5 months ago, and I see the cover and I'm looking at it. I'm like, man, sometimes I get into books that are really heavy, and I'm like, this is just going to be refreshing. This is something I have to do. So I put it on hold on Libby, and it finally comes through. And I'm 2 weeks out from going to Disney World. Okay. So
Uh,
I start listening to it, and I had no idea it was based in Kansas City. I'm like, oh my God. Like, for anybody that lives in Kansas City, this is absolutely the book. There's so many reasons why they need to. But from a historical standpoint, you stitch together a geography and a timeline that's absolutely fascinating. I mean, I could just see Walt by the electric park looking at the fountains and studying the lights. And then I go down to Disney World, literally, and I'm telling my family, I'm like, I just read this book about Disney. This is where it started. And I'm
yeah,
looking at the whole park and I'm like, it all made sense. Just there was all these clicking moments. But anyway, what a wonderful book. Thank you so much for taking a minute out to talk about it.
absolutely. It's a labor of love, and it was um, my love for my friend Charlie, but it was very much a love story to Kansas City. I'm not a native. I grew up in the Denver area. My wife and I moved out here with our kids 15 years or so ago. And this I've just fallen in love with this community, the people, the place, uh, the spirit. It's just a so I do think of Book of Charlie as partly being my thank you note to Kansas City.
So when you got here, did you think this was going to be a stopping point? Because you're coming from the East Coast, you're coming into a Midwest place that people sometimes just think is a sleepy cow town. Until St. Holmes came in on his magic horse, no one really considered this town to be a powerhouse. And all of a sudden, when you say 15 years, this town's grown a lot in 15 years.
This town, it has. It's really found its mojo, in so many ways. Uh, I knew it as a kid, you know, uh, being from Denver, we had to see the Len Dawson Chiefs come in and beat our Broncos every year. Um, so I had that sense of it. Um, then we knew about it as a barbecue town. In college, me and some friends actually made a road trip to see what Arthur Bryant's was all about back in the day. But I didn't know what to expect when I came to Kansas City in 2007. Um, and it's been exciting to watch everything that's happened here. Um, the you know the sports stories have been great. We there's a little bit of Royals fever in the air again this year.
Yeah.
Uh, Great to see him above 500, and it brings back the memories of that thrilling team 10 years ago, and hope of seeing that again. And then the Chiefs story is just amazing.
Yeah.
It's become a great food town, not just barbecue.
Yeah.
It's best place for tacos in America. That's who saw that coming.
Yeah.
Great music town. Yeah, I love it here.
The moment that hit me, and I grew up here. I grew up in Liberty, and I've
Mm.
lived in Kansas City. I'm in Lee Summit now, but I've always been in the metro. The minute that it hit me was when I was at the NFL draft. I went on the final day, and I was having this philosophical debate. Is it more important to see the first pick, or is it more important to see the last pick? So I'm going through this whole thing, and I'm with the guy, and he looks over and he says, "You realize Tom Brady was the second to last pick in his draft?" And I'm like, well, maybe this is the moment for me. But I remember looking around that whole area there at Liberty Memorial, and I was like, my God, this is really Kansas City. It just seemed like it needed to be, it could have been in Vegas, it could have been in New York, but we were right there in Kansas City, and the world was watching us, and it was quite a moment to see that happen.
Yeah, yeah, and it takes me back to one of the early scenes in the book of Charlie where my friend, born in 1905, as a little boy moves to Kansas City and sits on that hill where Liberty Memorial is
Yep.
and watches them, down below building Union Station. And you get this whole kind of panoramic sweep of the history when the station was new and Kansas City was the crossroads of America, and it comes back to that. We've got the World Cup coming.
Yep.
Who could imagine? We're Soccer Town, USA. That's going to be so exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, the thing that I love that what you did was it was such an apt metaphor. You tied Union Station back in at the end. It's this place that all of the soldiers kissed their wives and took off to go to war, and then it was dormant for all these years. And now it's revitalized, and Charlie was that way. Charlie always found a way to be positive. He always found a way to revitalize a bad story and made it into something that was uplifting and surprising. And I think that was such a perfect way of weaving that book together in a Kansas City way.
Well, thank you. And you've touched on something that's important to me for people to know about this story of a guy who lived to be 109 years old, and is very, winsome character who has all sorts of crazy, funny, delightful stories to tell. But what I want people to understand is it's not about just an easy, privileged uh, life. A lot of bad stuff happened to Charlie, both personally, uh, in losing his father as a young boy, losing his first wife under terrible circumstances. Uh, but globally, he lives through two world wars. He lives through a Great Depression. He lives through a global pandemic, and so on and so forth. And he, it's about picking yourself up and moving on. And how do you live in a way that's useful and positive and fulfilling, even though you're going through some hard stuff? Because you and I have seen enough of the world to know that everybody goes through some hard stuff.
Yeah, for sure. So you come to town, you're trying to get your head wrapped around this Midwest town, because coming from a coast, everything operates in a totally different way for anybody that hasn't lived that life before. And you see this guy washing his car at his age. What was the moment after you talked to him where you're like, this guy is a book? When did that happen, and how long did it take for it to come to fruition?
It's embarrassing to answer this actually because I'm a professional writer, a journalist, and author, and one of my main jobs is supposed to be noticing a great story when I see it, and it really was not until after Charlie had died, uh, which was 7 years after I met him. I met Charlie when he was 102, as you allude to. He was across the street from my new home, and he was out in his driveway in just a pair of swim trunks, washing his girlfriend's car with the garden hose on a Sunday morning. That's when I said, I need to get to know this guy. Um, and but it was a genuine friendship that we had. It wasn't, I didn't, when I went over, would cross the street to go, sit with Charlie and talk with him. I wasn't working, it wasn't a source and a reporter. It was a genuine friendship. And I will say that that's one of the lessons Charlie taught me, is that if you're going to have a happy, last half or last quarter of your life, you need to keep making friends, because we lose them little by little. Um, and Charlie was really good at making, much younger friends all the way to the end of his life. Um, After he died, I was working for Time Magazine at that point, and I wrote a little one-page thing that was, lessons I'd learned from one of the world's oldest men, just a column length piece. And my editor at Simon and Schuster saw that, and they called and said, "That's a book," And it was at that point that I was, yeah, it is a book. It did take me a long time to get it done. Uh, there's a famous line attributed to Mark Twain, like most great lines. Um, where he gets to the end of a long rambling letter to a friend and says, if I'd had more time, this letter would be shorter. Um, and that's definitely true of Book of Charlie. Writing a short book took me longer than writing a long book.
And I think the beauty of what you just said, your answer, which I think is perfect coming from a journalistic standpoint, that the precedent was that you were a friend, and I felt that in the book because you kept mentioning your friend. You weren't mentioning this man that I ran into, Charlie. You always refer to him, and now all of this comes full circle. And what a wonderful way of conveying that warmth and battling the pain of losing a friend and memorializing a spirit that we need more of on this planet, especially in these very strange times we're living through.
Well, thank you, and you're kind to say that. Charlie was he was great because even though he was over 100 years old all the time that I knew him, he was genuinely interested in me as I was interested in him. He had and he understood he had hit the genetic lottery. He just had all the right genes to live a long time and to keep all his marbles up to the end. Um, but he used that. He made great use of those gifts because he was, you know, he would read the stuff that I wrote. He wanted to discuss. He was interested in my kids and my family. Had great advice for me at various times. Um, and that was that you don't just want to live a long time. Life is not just measured in length, it's measured in depth, it's measured in breadth, and Charlie lived in all those dimensions, not just the long space of time, but he used his time, he made the most of it.
I think the one thing that's emblematic about this story is that Kansas City was always the backdrop. And I'm curious, did you ever sense that he wanted to ever live anywhere else? Or was there a level of love and being tethered to this town that he always wanted to have as a part of his narrative?
He was, I didn't get the sense that he ever wanted to live anywhere else. He briefly lived in Chicago while he was going to medical school at Northwestern University. So he had that opportunity to leave, but he loved Kansas City, and he literally, he could tell you his knowledge of the place was incredible because it was all firsthand knowledge,
Yeah.
and you'd talk about what felt like ancient history to me. And for him, it was just life. He'd tell you like, oh, this building was built before that building. Here's how they decided to do this thing. Here's why, this golf course is where it is and when they built it. And, he went back far enough that he remembered the original Kansas City Country Club where Loose Park is now. I mean, who remembers that? But he played it, and Kansas City was more than enough for him.
Yeah.
And it was great that way.
And the one thing about having a jazz radio show here in town is that your story about how he got into it is just emblematic of Charlie. Like he wanted to make extra cash. He just picks up a horn and goes. Who can do that? Who can just say, you know what, I'm going to be a saxophonist and I'm going to do it in the Paris of the Plains. I'm going to do it in the place where it was one of the cradles of it. So that part of his life, was that fascinating to you to think that he did that?
Oh, so it was amazing. Somebody told me after Charlie died, and so I don't have this in the book, and I was too dumb to. I don't know why it never came up in our conversations. But somebody told me that Charlie heard Bird play live before Charlie Parker moved to New York.
Yeah.
Um, but he certainly was in that milieu. And, going back, as you know, having read the book, even before Charlie Parker to the earliest days of Kansas City jazz, Charlie, after graduating from high school, for your listeners, uh, he built a crystal radio set so he could listen to the earliest days of commercial radio in Kansas City. Kansas City had one of the earliest stations, and Kansas City was the first station to broadcast jazz music.
Yeah.
It invented the what became, the Roaring Twenties jazz phenomenon. It started with a band in Kansas City playing weekly and then nightly on the radio, the Nighthawks. Um, and Charlie would play along uh, on his saxophone. Now, musical talent ran in his family. One of his sisters was a professional keyboardist. A couple of his sisters sang. So there was that gene, but Charlie never learned to read music. Was entirely by ear player, and yet worked his way through college. Putting together jazz combos, and that is, I mean, that's it's just wonderful.
Yeah.
It's like, how do you learn to play saxophone? I just learned to play,
Yeah.
just do it. Saying yes. Charlie was so affirmative with life. There's this overused phrase now of leaning into things, but Charlie really did. You had. If he didn't see a reason why not, why something couldn't happen, then he just assumed it could.
Yeah. Well, I think that's the beauty of the book too, is that it really celebrates the history of Kansas City, but there's this forward moving line. He's always progressing and moving forward, and I feel like that's emblematic of this city. We're always cognizant, like Lonnie McFadden has the Reno Club, and he's celebrating that being one of the initial places where radio was even hatched for jazz here in this town.
Yeah.
But there's always this motion moving forward. He's a dynamic guy that comes from a dynasty, and they're moving into the future, and they're doing wonderful things, and that's what Charlie was doing. Charlie was always like, this is where I came from, but I'm moving forward. I'm not getting stuck. I'm making new friends, all of the things that he did.
Well, as you know far better than I do, one of the great things about the Kansas City jazz scene is that um, it's not retrospective.
Right.
There's an honoring of the past and of the great tradition here, but not to pick on New Orleans, but a lot of the New Orleans music scene is kind of a museum,
Yeah.
and Kansas City's not that way.
Right.
The musicians are doing new things all the time.
And there's a community and they all like support each other. I hear from people that come in from like LA and New York, they're like, this is a town where we cheer each other on. Whereas in other towns, there's a competition and that kind of a thing. And that's another part of the Charlie thing. Charlie was just going to he's going to do his thing no matter what. He wasn't looking at what other people were doing. It seemed
Right.
like he was a pure existentialist and he was going right into the night and he was going to be brave about it.
He was. I use him. people ask me, well, if Charlie didn't know you were working on a book, uh, um, how would he feel about, this being in this, in this surprise bestseller, that's now being translated into 10 different languages around the world or whatever it is. Like he would have loved that his stories were recorded because he knew they were good stories. He
Yeah.
loved telling them. He was good at telling his stories. Uh, he would be very surprised that I turned him into, I use him as an example of the philosophy of Stoicism, because he always denied that he had any philosophy of life. If people would ask him, what's your secret? What's the key? And he'd say, I don't have a philosophy. My mom told me, just do the right thing, which, when you think about it, it's not a bad philosophy of life.
Right.
It's a pretty good one.
Yeah.
Do the next right thing. But Charlie was an example of this stoic insight that we only control the stuff that we bring to life. You know, all the other stuff, what other people do, what happens to us, the good fortune, the misfortune, that's all outside our control. What the government's doing, what the politicians are doing, we don't decide any of that. We do control our frame of mind, our attitudes, what goals we choose, what effort we put in. And if we focus on that, we can be useful and purposeful. And so that gets to what you're saying about the musicians here. You know, another person's success doesn't take away from my opportunities. In fact, what we see is that being in a community of successful creative people builds everybody up, creates an ecosystem for creativity and achievement. And so we want people to be succeeding around us because that creates more opportunity for us.
It seems as though this book could be a really good movie.
Well, I hope so. There's a very talented writer producer in in Los Angeles who happens to be another guy from Kansas City who wound up in LA, and he's got some ideas about how it might be a movie, and we'll see what he comes up with. That's not my business. And so I'm, watching from the sidelines and cheering from him. I'm not involved in the project.
So at the end of the day, as a writer, as a human being on this planet, your life got totally enlightened by this accidental figure that you moved in next to. What has his legacy ultimately done for you as a writer and as a human being, being a family guy and balancing all of these things?
He's this stoic insight, and stoicism has the worst PR department going. It's got this idea that it means being repressed, uh, buttoned up, unfeeling, disconnected from other people and from events. You don't care really. That's not what it is at all. It's about the life force and making the most of every moment that we have, whether it's a long moment on earth like Charlie's or a short moment. It's what we have, and and we need to seize it and make the most of it in a way that's purposeful, and that's the secret. I've been having wise older friends try to get this through my head for a lot of my life, and it's a philosophy that you learn it, it makes sense, but it's easy to backslide from it and to get back into the obsession with what's going on in Washington, or what's going on in Europe and the Middle East, or what's all things that are worth our attention, but we can't make them the source of our personal happiness or unhappiness, the source of our usefulness to the communities we live in and the people we live with. So Charlie, not by talking to me about it, but by living this philosophy, he 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 helped me learn it in a way that I had never been able to before. And now, I start every day with a few seconds of gratitude and focus on, here I am, this is where I am today, this is where my life has placed me. What am I going to do with this day to give my life some meaning and to bring some joy, maybe some kindness, some love into the world around me. Uh,
So, of all of the historical snapshots that Charlie painted about the history of this city, if you could get into a time machine right now and go back and see one of those moments in Kansas City history, where are you going to go?
1920s, somewhere in there. People, it was called the Paris of the Plains, and it wasn't because of the, beautiful architecture. It was because this was the town where everything, I compare it, it was the Vegas of 100 years ago. What happens in Kansas City stays in Kansas City. And you could meet and shake hands with the young Harry Truman, before he went off and built the modern world. It was a wide open town that had good and bad aspects to it, but uh, man, it was energetic, and there were people. You wouldn't want to be an African American in 1920s Kansas City, although it was that that was a happening culture. You know, a lot going on. Wouldn't it be fun to go hear the young Count Basie?
Oh man.
Figuring out that incredible minimalist piano style,
Yep.
figuring out what the jump was going to sound like. Uh, go sit at the musicians union at 4 in the morning and just take in the jam session. Uh, you know, Lester Young, Marianne Williams. I mean, God, what a weekend you could put
Oh
together.
man, my head's swimming with dreams. So, David, at this point, it's safe to say that you're a veteran of this town. You've been here for a while. In 2024, what do you like the best about Kansas City?
Oh my gosh, the people, I have such good friends here. Sorry about that clock chiming. Um, uh, the sense of stuff that's happening, the surprise. Kansas City surprises in neat ways. Like, a year ago, um, Travis Kelsey and Taylor Swift, if they were dating, nobody knew,
Right.
So that whole story that's just been that's just been whipped cream on top of the sundae for the
Yeah.
past year,
Mhm.
and who could have seen it coming? And you know, it creates this sense of like, what's gonna be next?
Yeah.
Did anybody think that 3 years ago we were going to have the first women's soccer stadium
Yeah.
in the world, and have that whole scene going on? It's just it's fun. I uh, Yeah, it's fun.
Amen. Absolutely, it is. Book of Charlie's wonderful. Thank you so much for taking a minute out. I absolutely urge everyone out there, go get it. It's a wonderful book, and it's such a testament to the human spirit and this town that we love. So, David, this has been an absolute joy and an honor. Thank you for taking a
My
minute out.
pleasure.
Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good
Yes,
to
sir.
see you.
Good to see you.